So when we share information with others or produce content for others, it's really easy to just dive in and start creating, but this is the biggest mistake I see people making. In this video, I'm going to be talking about what you need to think about and consider before you start creating content. Whether you realize it or not, every time you create, you are making design decisions as you are creating. But what are you basing those decisions on? Well, we automatically create based on our own perception, when what we really need to do is think about our audience and their needs. That's why the first thing you should think about before you start creating anything at all is your audience. Who are they? What do they need? Your approach and design should be driven by your audience needs and wants. So, before you start creating, here are the things that you need to understand about your audience. First off, who is your audience? Their background, level of experience is going to drive how you deliver your messages and what message you deliver. So think about who they are. For example, what you deliver to an executive would be very different to someone who is a new employee. Their levels are different, their expectations are different. So thinking about who they are and what their background is really important. Next, think about what do they already know. So often we are going to people who don't have the same level of experience with the message that you're creating, but it can be very hard to take a step back and realize that all the information that you've gathered may not necessarily have been passed on to your audience. So you really need to take that step back and think about what they already know and what they need to know. Next thing to consider is why they need this information and whether it's personally important to them. That will drive your actual mode and how you deliver a message. So if someone is personally invested, they're going to be more likely to read your message. You're going to be able to get away with more and provide them more information. If it's not personally relevant to them, or if they feel like it isn't personally relevant, then you're going to have to think of a different way of delivering that message to get it across. Once you understand who your audience is and their needs, the next thing you should think about is what they actually have to do with your information. This will feed into your mode or how you deliver your message, as well as other design decisions and how you lay out your information. For example, do they need to read your message from start to finish? If so, thinking about how you chunk information down and logically organize it can be really important to reduce overwhelm. If there is quite a lot of information you have to get across, think about things like highlighting the important points so they really stand out. Another thing to think about is whether they need to search for information. If so, thinking about how you lay out and create a hierarchy with your information is going to be really important so they can scan and find what they need really quickly. Also using other functionality that is possible through your mode. So for example, if you're creating an intranet site, sometimes there's other functions like the accordion option, which means that people can easily skim and then expand information to get the answer that they're looking for. Also think about whether they need to interact with your content. For example, if you are sending out a workbook that you want people to enter information in and it's in a PDF form, add in editable sections so they can actually do that and there's no need to print it off. Or you find where people don't have printers, they're then having to write on a scrap of notebook somewhere else because they can't type directly in. Thinking about how they're going to actually use your content will then drive all those design decisions. And lastly, think about how your audience should receive your information. So what we just spoke about around how they'll use your content will definitely feed into this, but there's some other things that you need to consider as well. For example, how do they receive information now, and does it make sense to use those same channels? Sometimes using existing channels can be really great, and it's normally the approach we do with communication because people are expecting it, they're more likely to read it. If you send them something in a different format, sometimes that can get missed off. However, that's not always the case, and you do need to consider whether the existing channels actually fit the information that you need to get across and whether or not there is a better option. The other thing to think about is whether they've requested information in a certain way. So, for example, execs tend to want information condensed, summary information. So you definitely need to think about what your audience expectations are around receiving your information, because if you provide it in a format they're not expecting or they're not going to be able to get through. So for example, if we use the exec example again, if you send them a 56-page document, they're just simply not going to read it. So thinking about your audience expectations around your mode is really important as well. One other thing to consider is how busy your audience is. So we all have the best of intentions. So even if you have a fairly engaged audience and they feel that your message is important, if they're going through something that is requiring them to be very busy, so for example, a finance department at the end of the month, your message just may simply not get through. So thinking about how and when you deliver it might change based on their availability. The other thing is, within organizations, there may be certain changes happening with your audience that are going to be distracting. So if you've got an organizational change within that area, perhaps now isn't the best time, or maybe you need to think or reconsider how you deliver that message over a longer period of time. Essentially, thinking about your audience is going to enable you to create content and information that's easier for them and your audience to understand and use. So I've covered off quite a few things that you need to consider. To make it a bit easier, I have linked in the summary section below a cheat sheet to cover a lot of the questions I've asked and some more, so you can start to work through this with your next communication and engagement. So I'd love to know, how do you get to know your audience? Leave a comment in the section below, and if you're interested in hearing more about how you can manage all your information and communication, make sure you hit the subscribe button.